Well, thank you, Don. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for inviting us to put on this panel. Universities are an important part of the bioscience ecosystem in the state. As you asked this morning, you asked about the talent pipeline. It's a very important part of what we do, but I think it's also important the universities as knowledge generators and as pushing the frontier of knowledge and in transferring knowledge from university laboratories to industry in multiple pathways, first through scientific publication. If you were to look at I think it's National Science Foundation data, that I think 2/3 of patent citations, of industry articles cited in patent citations are university articles. The major impact universities have is through, of course, our students, some of whom are here. I see Sarah Smaga, if I have your last name correct. One of our PhD students is here, and there are probably other students in the audience. And finally, of course, just through formal licensing and technology transfer, which is something that we do quite actively at Yale, as does UConn, and Mustafa is here. So we're pleased to have this opportunity to talk about this set of issues. We'll handle this pretty informally. Our panelists will introduce themselves briefly. I have some questions for them that I'll pose them to individually, but you should all feel free to chime in. And then finally, after we go through a couple of questions as we did this morning, we'll throw it out to questions you may have. So I'm going to start just we'll do introductions.
Great. My name is Ranjit Bindra. I'm an associate professor at the Yale School of Medicine. Clinically, I focus on adult and pediatric brain tumors, and I do radiosurgery for brain metastases. About the other half of my time, I run a research laboratory, an R01 funded group. We study DNA repair and small molecule screening, and our main interest is trying to drive those into the clinic. So I'm the PI of a number of phase 1 and phase 2 trials at Yale. And then sort of on the weekends, I do biotech entrepreneurship. So I've started 2 companies. One of them is a Series B funded company called Cybrexa Therapeutics. We're developing a new class of tumor-targeted drugs down in 5 Science Park.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Todd Arnold. I'm the Chief Laboratory Operating Officer of a company named Semaphore. We recently spun out of Mount Sinai in New York City. We started in the state back in 2014. We now have 2 sites in the state of Connecticut. One is in Branford, where we started our genetic testing laboratory, and our headquarters is located in Stamford. Our organization is a health information company. We are working very hard by generating a number of tests for folks to generate information and data on their health to help them manage their health throughout their entire lives. We're going to leverage that information to change medicine and diagnoses and make it better for everyone, and make sure that everyone can own their own path with their healthcare. We have now a recent startup. As I said, we spun out very recently from Sinai. We are a startup company with 400 people, so we have growing pains on a number of areas, and we're very excited to be in the state.
Hi, my name is Mustafa Analui. I am Executive Director of Venture Development with UConn, also Professor of Biomedical Engineering, and managing what we call Technology Incubation Program. That's our incubators that currently we have about 39 companies. Some formed based on UConn IP, some are coming from outside UConn within the state of Connecticut and outside state of Connecticut. We refer to that TIP program within UConn, and we'll talk more about that as we go through the conversation. And this gentleman who is late, he's John Soderstrom. He's catching his breath. He's a cool guy. Take it easy with him.
I think John has impeccable timing.
Started early. What time were we supposed to start? What's the question?
The question is to introduce yourself.
The question is, why do you look so good every time, John?
Because I dress like you, my friend.
Yeah, just sort of background who you are, what you do.
I'm John Soderstrom. I head the Office of Cooperative Research, which is Yale's main tech transfer office, which is counterpart to my good friend Mustafa here. And we have been engaged in the process of translating technology from Yale inventor faculty members into new ventures for the last 20 some odd years. And over that period of time, we've created something on the order of 45 new biotech companies in the state of Connecticut that have raised collectively around $1 billion in professional venture capital. We are not only active, we are optimistic about the future for this state and for the things that we're doing. And in fact, I just got from a Connecticut Innovations meeting that I was at just this morning, the things that are happening in the state are mind-bogglingly unbelievable. And the level of activity between our respective universities plus Jack's Labs and others is absolutely incredible for a state our size.
So my first question to my panelists was going to be, describe in 3 words the state of the entrepreneurship community in Connecticut. And I think John has just given us 3 about this mind-boggling, inventive, and very impressive. Now, Mustafa, I'm going to move to you and what you would say. In 3 words, how would you describe the state of affairs in Connecticut?
I echo the same word. I'm very positive. There are a number of good developments coming together as a result of key players collaborating with each other, also telling the story beyond the state of Connecticut. You know, we will have so many surprise visits that come visit us, and they always say, well, we didn't realize that was happening in Connecticut. We have a backlog of venture capitals scheduled to come to meet with us. We cannot schedule some of them until late fall. A year and a half ago, we had to beg them to come along and take a look at our portfolio.
So I think one of the things that comes to mind for me is that when Mount Sinai was looking for a place to land, we looked other places than Connecticut. So the first word that comes to mind for me is opportunistic. I think we're not opportunistic enough in selling what we have in the state. The next is I'll follow on with optimism. We not only started in Branford, but now we've expanded in Stamford, and we're looking to expand further within the state. And the last, I think, is we're too humble. I don't think we talk within the state, let alone outside of the state. I think the vast majority of people here this morning, although some of you are in the know, I think the vast majority of people within the state go, we do that here? Really? So I think one of the things we need to do is we need to get that information out within the state.
Yeah, I guess 3 words would probably be about to explode. I think that'd be probably good. Just as a professor at Yale, it's actually an unbelievably exciting time. I mean, I think as we'll talk about today, immunotherapy, the small molecules, all the reagents, high throughput screening, next gen sort of technologies, it's unbelievable. And I think everything is moving to this translational bench to bedside manner, where now what used to take 10 years is literally 1 or 2 years. And work from our own lab, we can attest to that. So I'm very excited.
Okay. Mustafa, you have talked in the past about the trend over time in availability of investment capital and venture capital and how it's gone up and down. And it sounds from the comment you just made that we're in a pretty bull market. Would you want to talk a little bit more about how it's looking from that?
Sure. Last year I spoke in one of these Cure BioCT event about giving a landscape of investment nationally and within UConn. And I looked up the numbers from last year. At a national level, the venture capital investment has reached a peak, 20% increase over the year before, $14 billion that is going. Within those categories, biotech is number 1 by far, even much higher than medtech as well as medical services. And that trend still is continuing. What is amazing is when you look at assets under management, AUM factor, state of Connecticut is number 4 in the country. But when you ask people, do we have enough VC? We don't see enough VC. I have actually the list with the numbers that it's after California, Connecticut, and the third one being New York. We are number 4. But when you start focusing on Connecticut, in 2017, we did not have any new fund form, major funds, large funds. Nevertheless, the companies get funding, and that goes back to the previous comment that we made, the visibility. About 95% of the capital raised by our companies came out of state VC funds or federal resources, that's a shift that even if we don't have sufficient capital, that is happening. The other part is I am personally involved with 3 different funds that are under discussion, not related to UConn, Connecticut-based fund that want to invest in Yale, UConn, other places, which is quite promising. Anything ranging from $40 to $200 million fund. And considering the time it takes for them to raise this capital, I think that late 2018, 2019 is quite promising, especially if the capital market stays the way it is. As you know, there is a time lag between the public market and the venture capital, between 12 to 18 months until we see some of those effects. The other good news relevant to this question is, I don't know if you saw that, number 1 city for talent exit is no longer Connecticut, it's San Francisco. It's so bad that they're running out of the rental cars and trucks to get there. And I feel, many of you probably go to Boston, Cambridge. I spend time very frequently, and I can see that similar phenomena is happening. And what the overbuilding and overpromise in that area, we're going to take advantage of those talents that are deciding to move to Connecticut, and the ones that are going to be willing to invest in that. We're going to have one example, major announcement in about the first week of April, the example of other talents not going to Boston is staying here and managing to raise money from other sources.
Yeah, actually, I just want to reinforce the point you just made, which is how many people here are aware that Alexion has moved from New Haven to Boston? All right, so a question for all you who raised your hand. What percentage of the people that were at Alexion that were offered opportunities to move took it? For those who, I want a show of hands, those who say that the percentage was greater than 70%, raise your hand. Greater than 50%. Greater than 30%. 20%, only 20% took the offer, and those were all in the top management ranks. The point of fact is, most of those people stayed, and what's really interesting is the people who stayed all have found jobs. They all are finding jobs here in Connecticut because we have a very robust biotech sector that is in an expansion mode, not in a contraction mode.
Exactly. Finding job or creating job opportunities by themselves.
Actually, one of the companies that I serve on the board of, Arvinas, right now has approximately 45 job openings. 45. Go figure.
Todd, can I follow on the theme of companies moving out of hotspots and people moving out of hotspots? So Semaphore has moved a significant people out of, if I understand this correctly, moved a significant people out of New York into Stamford. Can you talk about the thinking behind the company's decision and whether you see that as a further opportunities for other companies to do that?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's a great follow-on, and you guys have queued it up really easily for me. This is great. I appreciate that. I'll compensate you more afterwards. But I think it's a testimonial. I think, you hear, I guess it's human nature to be gloom and doom, and really I don't think that way. And you talk about the adage of half full, half empty. Clearly, Semaphore, moving out of an academic institution in New York, those of you know there was a $500 million with a B dollars invested in New York City to keep people around. That didn't keep Semaphore in New York for a variety of reasons. The cost, first of all, is the cost of space. In Connecticut, it is it's several orders of magnitude less to set up shop here. The other thing is that there's an amazing level of cooperation within the state of Connecticut, and I'll give you an example. When we were looking for space in Connecticut, the first place we came was New Haven. Looked around in New Haven, met with Ginny Kozlowski, part of New Haven EDC. There weren't any spaces available. Ginny could have said, "See you later. Good luck with that." Ginny said, "Take that drive, that long, painful, huge Connecticut State drive of 20 minutes to Branford, and you'll meet this guy named Terry Elton." And Terry said, "Cool, we got a lot of space for you." So there we are. That's where we started. And then later on, you're like, okay, we've got all these people who want to pull out of New York City and bring them into Connecticut. Where can we leverage the transportation infrastructure we have in the state that's functional? That's Metro North, and it really is functional as long as you say west of New Haven. Shoreline East has got its own set of issues, but we won't go into that now. So Stamford was a really nice spot because they have a train station right there. Metro North stops there, Amtrak starts there, and Stamford is progressive in that you have accessibility to shuttles that go to work. I don't like to take a shuttle if the weather's nice. It keeps my midsection under control if I walk a little bit. But it's available if the weather's really bad. You can take a shuttle to where our headquarters are. Not only, we're not stopping there, we have a lot of lab folks based in New York City that need a home, and we're going to figure out where to land them in the state of Connecticut. So it's a three-peat for Semaphore guys. It's not just one and done. And I think that kind of win, we need to celebrate those more. We need to talk about what John and Mustafa are talking about in terms of what we have here. Okay, everybody hears about GE going and everybody else going and this and that and the other thing. This is a bright spot in the state, and we need to leverage it. And just in terms of why we came here too, it's about talent. Granted, we've extricated a lot of folks from New York State, but when we built the site in Branford, Most folks in New York City couldn't really find it on a map, but the head count we have in Branford is 95% Connecticut hires. Okay, those are people who are recent graduates. Christine talked about the BioPath program, which is a great feeder program, and it pulls kids from middle school, gets them excited about science, and retains them all through undergraduate and postgraduate degrees. There is talent in the state, and it's for us to retain it. We've got the enthusiasm that's here has got to be spread statewide.
I appreciate your making those points, and also the fact that you brought up not just talent but also transportation. The topic came up again on with the CEO panel, and again, I think if we fix the trains between New Haven and New York, I think it'll have a major transformational effect on the shoreline. I'm going to stop dominating the questions at least for a few minutes. Give all of you a chance to ask questions. If you don't have any, I'll go back to sort of talking a lot. But other than that, I'll turn to you if you have questions. Yes, please.
So first of all, see me afterwards. Second of all, one of the things that we recognized early on when I came here was that the description of the phenotype of a Yale faculty member fits perfectly what you just said, which is lots of great ideas, with commercial potential, but the idea of how do you go about actually creating a business, raising money, hiring staff, renting facilities, fitting them out, et cetera, is just not in your sweet spot. And so, as opposed to our colleagues at MIT or Stanford and White, and I know that Mustafa is doing exactly the same up at UConn, we take a very active role. We actually become your new best friend in terms of helping you create that structure. So the first thing we're going to do is to help you to actually be able to articulate what the value proposition might be for an investor. Then we're going to help you identify which investors are most likely, and then we're going to actually schedule those meetings for you so that you can and we'll sit there in those meetings. We'll help you do the spreadsheets that they're going to ask you for in terms of how you would deploy capital. We're going to then start looking for potential entrepreneurs or management talent that could come alongside. I mean, we are not going to be passive. We're going to be very aggressive and forward-thinking in terms of helping you actually get that off the ground. So when I talk about the number of companies that we started, those are companies that I actually participated in, sat on the board of, and helped do, in many cases, write the first pitch deck for the investors.
I resonate the same message. As you know, within Yale and UConn, there are a number of entrepreneurship educational program competitions. One thing that we noticed within our environment in UConn, that most of these stuff are designed for young entrepreneurs, undergraduates. Full-time faculty members don't have time to take a 2-semester course or 7-week training hands-on course on entrepreneurship. As John mentioned, it's better to supplement with the other skill set, business skill set in your environment to be successful. And on top of that, we are designing one short course. It's really short, it's a day and a half, for high-performing faculty members, as well as our administrators that need to oversee entrepreneurship, to go over everything that we cover in 2 semesters in a day and a half, so they know what are the elements available to them when they want to go to the next step, rather than going through the random walk of finding. But your question is quite timely because you find the right person.
Yeah, by the way, May 9th is our Innovation Summit where a lot of these things get discussed. So
And
put that
Ranjit,
down.
you've created 2 companies.
Yeah, so one of the advice sort of that I always give to, I have a lot of colleagues who have started 2 companies, and is really understanding the power of a network and interacting with people that are entrepreneurs. Office, our Yale office has been fabulous. I mean, we've worked together for years. I think another advantage is going to a colleague like a Craig Cruz, who actually I went to when I was starting Cybrexa, and just it's remarkable how even though these folks are busy, fellow colleagues, faculty members will get coffee with you for 10, 20 minutes. Dave Rim, great example, from started HistoRx and pathology, and just sat down with them for 20 minutes and just sort of get connected with the right people, and then those people connect with other entrepreneurs, and just having coffee and kind of expanding through the network. So I think the power of people and the networking is very key to that.
Amen.
Any other questions? Yes, please.
Just a big comment on how does the money, once you start in the lab and you have a successful idea, and you launch it and get it out, companies out there, how does a university get some money back?
Did everyone hear the question?
Well, I think
Lots
that
of ways.
the model is
Mustafa, let me just repeat the question first. So the question was, once the university has the idea, has the invention, is there money coming back to the university?
so the model is very similar across multiple universities. The question is how much of each of the categories, because if the patent is generated by faculty member in a university has certain rights to it, and the company created universities tend to get some kind of equity within that. But in general,
So there's a license.
yeah. But in general, the assumption is if the faculty member is successful, what they make in the long run will pay back to university and the community. We don't need to suffocate them with a strong hand equity position on day one. That's the thinking. In fact, I know that this is the same model that Yale used. And even if you look at the very successful academic centers, that's the way they operate. They want to enable faculty members to be successful and get the benefit in the long run. Within our incubator, the companies that come from outside UConn, we don't even take any equity position. And you may ask, what's the benefit there? The short-term benefit is whatever money they raise, they will spend in Connecticut, and they will interact with our faculty members and students. That's the short-term benefit. But in the long term, as I mentioned, if they're successful, the community will be successful in the long run.
Yeah, it's interesting because the money part is actually way down the list of things that are important, because actually the key here, and both for UConn and Yale, it's to establish to enhance our reputation as major research centers. So that's number one. The way we're going to do it is by recruiting and retaining the best and brightest. And if the best and brightest want to start companies, that's what we're going to do. And if we do start the companies, then we have the economic development impact that Mustafa was talking about. And if all those things happen, then we have a license which might get royalties when the product gets on the market. We have equity if the company is successful. We probably got sponsored research, but more importantly, our faculty are probably generating more research grants with NIH because they're much more competitive having done all those things. So we get money back lots of different ways.
I would also just add to that 2 points. One is I think that it's been Yale's strategy, John will correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure it's UConn's strategy to also focus as much as we can when we're launching companies based on university inventions to have them be in New Haven, or in your case in Farmington or in stores. I think
No, we want the UConn ones in New Haven too. So.
Yeah. And Yale companies go to UConn.
I think that's
right?
very
They go to
true.
Farmington.
Yale has shared a number of great opportunities with us, and it was a perfect
How many
match.
Yale startups are in your incubator right now? 3, right?
At least 3, and they're outstanding group of scientists. They're still well connected with Yale. They didn't move completely from Yale, so they have access to the best resources across the board. And it has been a great experience. We have done the same thing with MIT, Johns Hopkins, and Cornell. So that's why bringing these high-performing, promising talents, they create the environment, the ecosystem that we need to grow.
So I have a question here, then here. So. So the question was, in addition to using intellectual property coming from a university to create a new company, what about licensing to an established company, or what's that strategy, and what do the universities do?
Well, actually, we take a three-pronged approach. Startup represents the minority of things that we actually transfer. Licenses represent, if I look at all the licenses, we did 100 licenses last year, 10 of which went to startups. 11 went to startups, sorry. So 89% went to existing companies. But that's only one thing. Another way they can help you is by doing sponsored research with existing corporations as well. And that ends up being one of the big growth industries within our institution, at least. And it's actually exploded in terms of both big strategic alliances where you got multi-millions of dollars coming in, but also just one-off sponsored research projects with a company where you're actually working in collaboration with scientists from the outside. So we're kind of agnostic. Let me be perfectly honest. One of the reasons I came to Yale was because I wanted to do startups. And I saw it as being a place that was very ripe for those things to happen, but was being very undermined at the time. And so it's been very rewarding. But in terms of real dollars coming in, 40% of our revenue stream comes from startups. The other 60% comes from existing corporations.
And we always tell our faculty, not every great idea needs to become a startup company. There are many ways to make it successful. And some of the universities have fallen in that trap of generating startups after startups. John was telling me a story of a very well-respected university that created how many companies?
Way too many.
Way too many. And it's good for your record because you see the chart from last year, this year jumps up. But if you create those companies with no plan, with no support, they become liability in the long run.
Well, they actually end up filling up a drawer in your file cabinet, and that's it.
Yeah, we can share this too. Yeah.
I'm trying to really shift a little bit or add another parameter into the discussion throughout the day, and that's the non-for-profit organization or the patient advocacy groups like the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, the American Cancer Society, which are all either in Connecticut or very close by. And I think the biotech has been leveraging on that connection to really gain access to the clinical patients, understand what are the clinical outcomes that you want to look for. How does the academia, in terms of the entrepreneurship, want to leverage that accessibility to patients?
Well, what's really interesting is those same foundations have become very entrepreneurial in their own sense and are very active in encouraging us to get more engaged with the private sector and to actually create various partnerships. So it's actually very synergistic. And if you look at at the research budget for Yale, 25% of all of our research dollars come from those foundations.
And we do interact with some nonprofit organization from a different angle to convert some of the great science they do into potential product and services. For example, we have a very close relationship with Connecticut Children's Medical Center, that they're focused on children's health, but as their researchers come up with great ideas, we have one particular case, there's a surgical tool that their chief of surgery invented, but their focus is the patient care. Therefore, we help them to bring it on board and make sure that innovation gets into the market to the patients in the long run. So that's a different angle that we are working with nonprofit organizations.
I'm going to pivot us a little bit and talk. I think that you raised a question this morning about the talent pipeline, and we had the opportunity to talk about the BioPath initiative out of Southern Connecticut State University, which I think is a very strong program. Strong in part because of the depth of needs assessment they did at the front end to figure out what industry needed in terms of academic pipeline. The Commission on Fiscal Stability, which released its final report just a week or two ago, did a lot of deep dive into talent pipeline, especially in the STEM fields in Connecticut, and they made a number of interesting observations, such as we're strong on science, not as strong on engineering, which is sort of an important point. But another startling observation was that 32% of students graduating from college in Connecticut stay in Connecticut. So my question for the panelists is, as you look at the pipeline you need either for the companies we're creating or the companies you run, are you concerned about that statistic, and what can we do as a state to increase the retention of highly trained, very talented people coming out of college?
It's a tough question, so I pass it to him to answer.
I'll protect John, and I'll try to set this up. I think one of the most important things is first is recognition of the issue, and I think we're there. And I think, you know, the work at Southern is excellent. Southern has just started an undergraduate degree in biotechnology. They are also working on setting up several professional science master's programs. I'll talk a little bit about what those are in a moment. University of Connecticut has had a professional science master's program in applied genomics for 18 years now. I am a Boston trained person who worked up there for a while, and 18 years ago obviously did not go back to Boston, and have been very active in the PSM program at UConn. And I think one of the things that's important is that industry and academia need to partner in order to understand where the issues are. And I think universities need to remember that not only are they sources of knowledge and growth and testing, they're also sources of workforce. They're also sources of economic growth for within the state and across the country. And I think sometimes you lose that a little bit. And I'll give a concrete example of where I did my graduate degree. I went back and talked about a PSM because they were thinking about those, and the comment I got back was, well, wait a minute, you know, that's like a technical degree, you know, this is a 4-year prestigious university. And I was like, but we need to go back and look at the mission of what the university is there for. And I think that's a really important thing. And I think the way you retain talent is you offer them training opportunities. You partner with academia and industry to give them internship opportunities. Because how many times do students come back to those of you who mentor students and say, you know what, I got great grades, I've done really great, I'm a smart thinker, I'm a problem solver, but I don't have any experience. So that's where the partnership gap lies. Industry and academics need to partner for that type of thing. When I worked for 3M in Meriden, we had a very robust internship program. We probably hired 80% of those students. Many of them were from outside of the state because it was an engineering company. And as Rich said, there was not that necessarily strong engineering in the state. But conversely, for biology interns that I had when I was at 3M, we hired many of them, and we placed many of them, and they stayed in the state. So I think there's several things we need to do. We need to make sure that the training programs are aligned with what industry needs in the state, because if everybody's like, well, that's your responsibility and that's your responsibility, ultimately the ball sits in the middle of the room and no one picks it up. And secondarily, what we need to do is, you know, you go back to the comment that was made by Dawn earlier about the people at UConn had no idea what's going on in bioscience. And we need to bring the info to the people. So I'll stop there.
So I want to amplify on something you just said, because one of the things I did recently for a totally different reason is I went to the BioCT website and looked at the employment opportunities, just looked at the jobs that are available. And I scanned down through there. And first of all, I was shocked that there was over 100 jobs posted there. Now, many of them were from Arvinas, so I knew some of that. But what was really interesting is how many entry-level jobs were unfilled. We're talking entry-level jobs. And that's where the disconnect is happening, is that these jobs are there. If we're actually having a hard time filling these jobs, and we're not sure where the source of, from the company standpoint, I don't think they know where the source of talent is going to come from. And so I think one of the things we have to do is, as you suggested, figure out a way of building a bridge that integrates these things into a whole. Because the opportunities are there, they're going to continue, because the companies that we're starting have jobs that range all the way from beginning at the bench to executive ranks, and we're going to continue to pump them out. They're all venture-backed, they're going to grow, and they're going to mature, and they're going to need more talent. So I found the conclusion from the committee a little disconcerting, because that talent shouldn't be escaping, because there's plenty of opportunities to stay here in the state and find positions.
Just to give you a specific example, this is a real scenario that in late 90s, I was part of the strategy discussion with ADA, American Dental Association, and the topic of conversation was state of Utah did not have a school of dentistry. There was not a single school of dentistry in the state of Utah. So they never trained any dentists. But there was no shortage of dentists, subspecialties, endodontists, orthodontists. They have plenty of those. Opportunity was there, and talents moved there. You know, same thing within the state of Connecticut. I don't want to be hung up on those numbers, because if we create opportunities, our people will stay, others will come. It's not a bad thing that our people are moving somewhere else. You know, we just received $22 million donation from a gentleman that even didn't go to UConn but liked UConn. When people go elsewhere, they are successful. They remember where they came from, and they will contribute back. A simple example, very, very small example of this scenario. Last year, we took about 18 paid summer students in our incubated company. 18 students, it's not much. Turned out to be extremely positive experience for students. Some of them even got the job with the companies they work with. Some of them, they changed their future plans based on what they learned. Yesterday, I asked how many applicants we have for this summer. 480 kids applied for summer internship. And I don't think we can couple up more than 25 paid positions. So you can see that if you create the opportunity, if you give them the chance, they will stay, and they bring others.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add something from the academic side. So having trained a number of grad students, postdocs, and undergrads, and I mean, I actually think it's a good thing for people to leave, especially undergrads coming, you know, from all over the country, if not the world, to Yale, and they're going to go to graduate school and want a different experience. I think the key is that we continue to grow a biotech sector that they feel like they want to come back to. And I can say this from the biotech side. When we started Cybrexa, we're about 12 people strong now, but our CSO search was difficult to some degree because we weren't like Boston in the sense that we had a lot of candidates from BI, for instance, that said when BI shut down and said, you know, I'd love to take this job, but you know, you guys are a startup, you got 2 years of runway, and if this were to close, it's not as easy for me to go to the shop next door. And so I think a message for me is it'd be fine to have people go, but as long as they come back to an even bigger community where it's less of a risk to move back to Connecticut.
Ranjit, can you speak to the graduate students and medical students you're teaching, their perspective on an academic career versus an industry career, and is this attractive and appealing to them, especially given the fact that the long-term outlook for federal funding through NIH is still a little questionable?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I actually just had breakfast with one of my grad students who's about to graduate. So, you know, really one of our best students thus far, and we had a long discussion about academia versus industry, and obviously, you know, it's not one or the other, and you know, every component of the bioscience sphere is very, very important. One of the alarming trends that I see at the moment. And it's always tough. It can be confounded, as other faculty people in the audience know, that it could be my stage of career. My lab's been open for 6 years. We have about 15 people in the group, and maybe we're attracting a certain type of people. One of the things that's changed is there's a lot more fear of going into academia. We are actually set to lose a pretty large, substantial portion of the next generation that will not go into academia. I hate to be kind of a wet blanket, but unless we can course correct, we're going to have a pretty big talent drain.
Yes, Sarah.
I have a follow-up question. Thank you. I'm a PhD student at Yale, and so how do we prepare PhD students to do things other than academia? How do we create people with the skills to start companies and, you know, move directly into industry, maybe without having to do a postdoc where you still, you know, don't make money and you're still technically training for academia?
It's a great question. If you guys want to comment first, or I can.
Sure.
Afterwards.
I'm happy to talk about it. Because one, we get that question asked by lots of graduate students and postdocs. And so we've created a whole host of different programs, internships with companies, training programs within our own office where we actually recruit students to come and work with us on some of our programs, specifically geared towards advancing some of the technologies into the marketplace, either in terms of licensing, collaborations, or new ventures. All of those things are possible, and it's just a matter of engaging with us. And we keep, you know, a running tab of where those opportunities lie and try to get people partnered up with various companies that are ultimately interested in hiring the talent once they see it.
And those are great points. And I think the other point I would mention is, so my wife's an assistant dean of the business school, so they have a phenomenal entrepreneurial sort of community by nature because it is a business school. And I would encourage even connecting with some of those groups there and actually just kind of learning who those people are and getting involved in some of these business plan competitions. And then again, talking to folks like myself and others who have started companies and saying, hey, I'd love to come by your company one day and actually meet some of your people and have some coffee and actually just kind of see exactly what it's like. So there's a lot of informal ways to do it.
Next year, we'll be launching a lot of other programs that will be geared specifically towards graduate students and postdocs interested in learning the language, learning how to get into the network, et cetera, specifically in the New Haven area.
So, one of the roles that BioCT plays in the state is really helping to, in addition to being an advocate for the community, it's also to help promote economic development of the community. And I don't want to give tasks to Dawn, but I think it sounds to me as if there may be two follow-up projects here. One is to take the BioCT job list and then figure out how to continue to build those connections that Job was talking about. Because I think in some ways that has to come from the private sector, which understands the needs more deeply than any state agency does. And second, I think it's also maybe to be a convening force or convener, because you do have BioHaven talk speaker series down at the TAC at Yale, which is very productive, and other ways to help get graduate students, not just from Yale, but from all the schools in the state, dipping their toe into the companies. So that's something to follow up. And I'm going to ask one last question for you guys, unless anyone else has on the floor, because I'm going to leave plenty of time for Patrick Plouffe. But I just wanted to ask one quick, I'm sorry, Dawn, here I'm cutting you off.
Yeah, if I could, just since we're on the topic of the talent engagement, et cetera, in the state, from my time I spent at UConn a couple weeks ago and being shocked that a lot of the grad and PhD students had no clue what industry was like and what kind of jobs are out there, and they're all struggling, and the majority of them want to go into industry. So one of the things we're going to be doing is creating a webinar series called A Day in the Life of. And so getting folks who are biostatisticians or policymakers, whatever, to do a webinar with us so that students can look at that and they can go, wow, that's what that's all about. Let me learn more about that. And then potentially create ways for them to learn, get training for something that they've really sparked their interest. So we are looking into doing something like that, and we are trying to find ways to get the word out about the talent engagement program. But I just wanted to let you know.
Thank you, I appreciate that. So the last question I'll pose, and try to turn the time back to Patrick, is we've talked a lot over the years about the valley of death, of new inventions and ideas, and the struggle between the gap between what the university does and what the National Institutes of Health will fund, and the gap between that point and when a potential invention has demonstrated itself enough to be fundable by angel investors or venture capitalists. And we put in place different programs here in the state, the Center for Bioscience, the Connecticut Bioscience Innovation Fund, and National Science Foundation has I-Corps, NIH has the REACH program. Have we gotten better at bridging that gap, and is it getting any easier, Ranjit or any of you other guys, to get an invention out of a university or to get it licensed?
It depends on whom you ask the question. When I was a young faculty member and my grant rejected from NIH, I thought they are a bunch of stupid people, don't understand what I'm talking about. After a couple of revisions, I fully understand what was missing, and I applied correctly to get the funding. So there is that gap in understanding as well. We have innovators that they think because they replicated one data set once, therefore they are ready to go to clinical trials. And so that gap is not only funding, it's more of an understanding of what other data you need to go through. In my view, I have never seen a case of good idea, good people with the right plan, with no money. I can assure you, and I say that in a public domain, and I see it's being recorded here, if you have a good idea with the right team around it, we'll find the funding to support it. That's my view. Having said that, do we have sufficient money for early stage ideas, every stage ideas to get the money? No, absolutely not. We are very selective in what goes to company formation or licensing and all that stuff. But I think overall, based on the resources that, Rick, you mentioned, it's getting better. That gap still exists, both in terms of funding and understanding. But overall, I am very optimistic.
was going to wait to that announcement. No, and I think this is, I probably would comment on the clinical side. So, run a lab, but also do trials. And one of the great things we're doing at Yale, there's a woman named Pat LaRusso and a gentleman named Paul Eder, and they had the phase 1 program. Pat's actually the head of phase 1. And one of the unique things now, kind of addressing this valley of death, is we have a team at Yale that actually recognizes the importance of really, really good basic science and translating that into the clinic. Not that it was completely lacking before, but one of the things that I've been telling a lot of my trainees is that we actually need more bench scientists, PhDs, walking through that valley of death, because I think in the past it's always, you have a great discovery, you get the science paper, and then someone's going to pick it up. And believe it or not, someone will pick it up, but most of the time they'll mess it up, which is actually very interesting. And what we now need is the people who really understand the target engagement or how their kinase inhibitor really should be used at the table, all the way to designing the correlative for the phase 0 trial. And so I think while we're made a pretty good amount of progress, I think we need to do even better at getting those people from the lab to bring their inventions all the way into a clinical trial.
So, I pick up on both comments for a second. Just first of all, one of the issues I discovered when I moved to Connecticut was that there were good teams, there was great technology, transformational technology, and it wasn't getting funded. And the reason wasn't that the money wasn't that funders weren't interested or venture capitalists. It's just they didn't know where to look. And so part of the job that Mustafa and I play is helping investors find it more efficiently, because they're not going to spend time, combing through databases and journals and, various forms of however we catalog all of our inventions. They're just not going to do that. What they want is they want to be spoon-fed. Fine, I get that. I understand why. They don't have time, they don't have patience, and in some places it's much easier to do that because they already have networks of things that are coming to them. So our job was, how do we intersect that process? And so part of that was we became traffic cops. We built relationships with the investors, we found out what they were interested in, and then we spoon-fed them the things that we thought were most likely to be of interest to them. I think we've gotten much better at that. The second part, which we're just now talking about, is this whole clinical translational aspect. I think we are just now starting to understand how to train people, because it's a totally different thought process. The idea of designing experiments with the idea of FDA approval in mind is a different thought process than the typical experiment that's going on at the bench in either one of our institutions. And that's where I'm seeing transformation. I'm seeing faculty thinking differently, because as they get engaged, they find out, oh, that's different data than I was going to collect. That's a different question than I was thinking about. I would design my experiment differently. And I'm getting that feedback, that they appreciate the fact that there are programs now at the School of Medicine and other places where they can learn how to do those kinds of things.
I just want to jump. It's such a great point, and not to bring back Pat LaRusso, but
That's awesome.
Right? And she's become a clinical mentor for me. And actually, I still remember, we had recently made a discovery that IDH mutations induce the PARP sensitivity, and we're running a clinical trial based on our lab's discovery. But she actually comes to all of our basic science sessions, and she actually raised her hand one day and said, "Well, do you think you can get the plasma exposure? Have you actually looked in the tumor? And do you have on-target engagement?" And it's sort of those questions, and people kind of turn around and say, "Oh, I never really thought about that." And I think that having that sort of dynamic interplay and sort of close, so that people think differently than just outside of the actual bench and where this is going to go clinically, I couldn't agree more.
With that, I'm going to call it to a close. I want to thank all of our panelists for a fantastic and lively and entertaining, informative discussion. Thank you very much.